The defense also argues that the interview was actually an illegal interrogation because Armstrong was never read her Miranda rights. She said she wanted to leave 5 times and said repeatedly she wanted an attorney. The detective said she continued the conversation because Armstrong engaged and felt her statements were not definitive. Defense argued Armstrong used definitive language, and the state pointed out the detective told Armstrong she was free to leave 5 times.
Hey guys, so I'm really excited to be here dealing with the biggest piece of the puzzle that we're really missing. Well, this cap really doesn't look very good. I wonder if I should just maybe go without it. Yeah, so we're dealing with the biggest piece of the puzzle that's missing, which is the period leading up to the crime, basically 2020 to 2021 going into 2022, and that's in terms of Colin Strickland's story, but it's also to some extent dealing with Caitlin Armstrong and Mo Wilson. It's how these three people, how their fates sort of merge, right? That's what we've been waiting to get to all of this time, really. So what I've just played you is something else that we've been dealing with, is the defense's attempt to create this idea that there was no love triangle, that certain things should be suppressed or inadmissible, and they haven't succeeded at that. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you know when the trial is scheduled? Do you guys know the exact date for when the trial is scheduled? Hi, Cynthia Nielsen in Benoni. Good to see you here. I hope you're going to be able to stay awake as long as I am. Anyone know the date that the Armstrong trial is scheduled to begin? Pauline Buckles, good to see you. Okay, so you might want to scribble this date in your calendars, right? June 26, 2023, right? So I do want to deal with the transcript again. Let me just, I'm going to do this. Let me just do that. I do want to deal with this transcript. And I don't know if you guys remember where we left off. Colin Strickland was talking about how bizarre it was that his motorcycle had fallen over, and there was almost a kind of a sense that there'd been some kind of intruder situation. That he says extremely bizarre, that I've never had any vandalism, right? And that is where we kind of left off, right? So we are going to come back to that. And we're going to come back to that news story we're dealing with, because basically everything you see here in yellow, Rick Kofer was sort of saying to the judge, I've got a problem with all of this, right? And it was a 487-page motion, basically, right? So, and we're coming to the last 50 pages of that. And obviously, he didn't succeed in all of that. But it is important that we come back to not only the end of Colin Strickland's transcript, but also what Kofer said in the beginning, right? We haven't sort of dealt with that yet. Terry says, yeah, that is right. The trial was originally going to be November 22. There was actually a stage where it looked like it was going to be like even earlier. Because they were asking for a fast track trial. So this trial has kind of been all over the place in terms of going to happen, postponed, and so on. So anyway, it looks like June 26 next year. I wonder if I'm going to be in America for that. We'll see. Okay, so we are going to deal with the remainder of this article. It's such a great article written by Ian Parker. And I'm going to put a link in the description, sorry, in the chat. It's really worth reading in its entirety if you've got time. Stephanie says, interesting Collins putting that out there about vandalism straight away. Wonder if he and Caitlin had discussed that. It's kind of, it feels a little bit like the John Benet Ramsey case where, you know, it's not me or you, there's some kind of intruder, there's some invisible entity, it's that sort of thing. Okay. Right, so you guys ready to get going? So this is the third and final part dealing with our analysis of Colin and Caitlin's backstory. And as I said earlier, we are dealing with the crucial part of the timeline, 20 to 2021, right? Sorry, 2021 to the present. Okay. So quoting from the article, in the summer of 2021, Colin Strickland had no victories in gravel racing. He blamed a knee injury and incomplete training. So if you've followed the story so far, he was really kind of on this magic carpet, right? He was sort of on this yellow brick road of achievement, right? Do you remember he was offered the contract to race in Europe? Do you remember that he was becoming the king of gravel riding? And then he sort of turned his back on all that only to fizzle, right? He has no victories and he blames a knee injury and incomplete training. In other words, there's no one to blame but himself. Do you see that? I'm just saying he's kind of, his star is reaching its zenith. And instead of just the fairy tale burning brighter, it just fizzles out. And this is approaching the crucial time in the timeline, right? And in true crime, we call this a slow burn. It's a slow buildup of tension and anxiety, disquiet and discord. And the pandemic disrupting an elite athlete at the moment he hits his stride, that was part of it. That's part of the teeth grinding frustration at work here. And this isn't me saying it. This isn't my opinion. This is what he said himself. In fact, he told a reporter, a guy called Daniel Benson from Cycling News, that August, he said, it's starting to show. Meaning, I've figured out that I'm not very good at training. I'm good at racing. I'm good at racing myself into fitness, but I'm not really very good at training. And that statement, we acknowledged that he had this difficulty training and with discipline to some extent. That was from this article. Let me do that. And so when he says those words, it's starting to show. Those words are actually quite ominous because other things are starting to show as well. The cracks are starting to show in other areas as well. Now, I don't know if you guys can see in this article, right? I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to, can you see he says, I've realized I'm good at racing, but not training. And this was August 10, 2021. This was within really about 6 months of the murder. September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Okay, a little bit more, 9 months. This was 9 months before. And so what does it say here? He explains struggles to find form in the pandemic. But basically, in a single word, what is happening? He's struggling. He's basically struggling with himself. It's nobody else that's you know, at work here. He's struggling with himself. Do you guys see that? Okay. So further in that same article, it said, quote, the 2020 season was a taxing affair for everyone on the gravel race circuit. Races were almost unilaterally cancelled or postponed. I'm quoting from this article in Cycling News. And Strickland's out of competition condition dropped dramatically as he focused on other projects. And I think that is kind of a long drawn out way of just saying that he kind of lost focus. When the pandemic hit, he wasn't able to train on his own. He wasn't able to motivate himself that there would be races to execute that training, right? And I don't think he was the only person who felt that. You know, there are no races, so why keep your training at a very high level throughout the year if there are no races in the year, right? And that is the difference between certain elite athletes and others. Some would see an opportunity that certain athletes wouldn't want to do that and wouldn't be able to do that, whereas others would get that teeth grinding, almost masochistic satisfaction in just training. Also, some athletes that had gotten left behind a little bit, this was their chance to catch up, right? And then they did. Yeah, because of the pandemic, exactly. So Mel Stiller, yes, he recognizes he's not self-disciplined. It's a different kind of self-discipline. It's kind of, you get the idea that he operates, his fueling mechanism is from inspiration, is sort of riding on the seat of his pants, right? It's not that he doesn't have that energy, he just needs kind of a different kind of fire, right? I'm a little bit like that as well. If you give me, and I think a lot of people are, if you give me lots and lots of time to do something, then I tend to, I won't say wait till the last moment, but I tend to do things when the time limit is quite serious, put it that way. I won't do something months and months and months ahead of time and then hand it in early, right? I kind of need that sort of level of stress. I need that level of urgency, right? So do you guys see that? So the other thing that he started doing was he shifted his focus to mountain biking. So yeah, he's actually riding a gravel bike. Can you see? Let me do this. Can you see that it's got a racing bike's handlebars? It's kind of got time trial bars as well, right? And it's kind of got slightly thicker tires than a traditional road bike. It's got a similar frame to a road bike without suspension, right? It doesn't have any suspension, but the tires are a bit thicker. But that is the handlebar setup of a road bike, right? So pretty much the only difference, and I'm simplifying, is basically the thickness of the tires. Okay. I think the frame is probably also stronger, just generally a stronger frame. But basically, that's the difference. Okay. So you can see starting to lose focus. At the same time, a new wave of gravel riders like Lawrence Ten Dam and Peter Stetina, we mentioned him in the previous live. Peter Stetina sort of came out and started to dominate. So basically, in a flash, the competition kind of infiltrated his domain and kind of left him behind in a way, right? He sort of emerges the king only to be very quickly taken over by other sort of contenders, right? And he's struggling to motivate himself. He's struggling with self-belief, I guess. He's struggling to see the reason to, you know, I guess to participate with also within the pandemic scenario. Okay, so can you see how one moment he's on top and it seems like he's the king of the world, and then the next he's not, and he's quite unsettled by that. It's exactly what Stephanie says. If you don't lose it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. But all of this is playing out the year before Mo Wilson's death, right? In other words, the king is being kind of undermined. This guy who's worked so hard to get to the top of the mountain is finding that his position is now, well, he's lost that position. And that can be depressing. And so he says here in this article, he says, I just haven't been on the bike as much. And he says, I've been avoiding Strava. And I can tell you as well, I've had a horrible year. I turned 50 this year. I thought I was going to have an incredible 50th year. I thought I was going to take part in a half Ironman not long ago and other big events. And I thought I was really going to also shine. And this was going to be the year of the comeback. And meanwhile, I broke 2 ribs right in the beginning. I had some serious other problems and just damaged my knee as well. And so I understand exactly what it's like. I've been avoiding Strava as well. In fact, today I looked at Strava for the first time and my graph has just gone like that. It's just like nosedived. And it's horrible to look at. It's shocking to look at. It's depressing to look at. But the bottom line is you've got to respond in some way. You either shrug and go on the next day, or you make a sort of a commitment to start building again. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do. You've got to start somewhere, right? But it's basically that idea of, you know, you haven't been able to do the work. You know you've been slipping, but you don't actually want to see that in statistics. It's almost like you know you fucked up in an exam, and you don't actually want to get that paper that's going to confirm that. You don't actually want to look at the actual mark on the paper because you know what's waiting for you is not going to be pleasant. It's that kind of feeling, right? So that's where he is kind of at a low point just after being at an extremely high point, right? That's often how nightmares are so nightmarish, is they're right next to a fairy tale. Nightmares are the hardest to deal with when they were what's the word? When they were preceded by a fairy tale. And the more fairy tale, the more nightmare, the nightmare, right? So does that make sense? And of course, you had the fairy tale on the one side. Well, this nightmare wasn't even finished. The end of the nightmare was Mo Wilson being murdered, right? So what you really want to look at is the entire fairy tale of Colin Strickland's rise to the shining hero, right? The entire thing. And then you've also got to see him slipping off that throne. And now it goes from daylight to night and night, so day to nightmare. Well, the bright day is now also contrasted by this really dark night. Does that make sense? You can't see the one in isolation. You must see them together. It's part of a process, right? And as it happens, Mo is also part of that process. Caitlin is also part of that process. Do you think that a fallen king is a bit more vulnerable to his emotions in that state? than he otherwise would be? Do you think he maybe needs a bit of an ego boost? He needs a bit of some extra fuel from somewhere, right? Okay, so let's continue. So do you think his relationship, so there is Caitlin Armstrong. Let me just do that. Could his relationship with Caitlin have strengthened during this phase and actually gotten more serious? So I've used a couple of words like that he experienced difficulty, that he was struggling, that he was less focused on riding, right? So if he was focused less on riding, on racing, on training, well, then what was he focusing more on? Well, wouldn't Caitlin in a way be the benefactor of, and you must bear in mind, living with a professional athlete can be quite daunting. They can spend a lot of time selfishly pursuing what their goals, right? But now all of those goals are taken away. So in the aftermath, doesn't Colin start to, although he's losing focus on his sport, doesn't he start to pay more attention to Caitlin? Don't they start doing more things together? Don't they start to invest time, money, and effort in other things, right? And in a way, isn't it a case that Colin losing his fairy tale in a way helped Caitlin establish her fairy tale? This guy needs me, um, and sees me, and I've got a place in his life in this situation, right? So, in other words, when riding wasn't going so well, his relationship was going in the right direction. If you've been following these part one, part two, part three, you kind of got the sense that Colin either was a player or he had lots of relationships, but you kind of get the sense in the last 3 years, and obviously, I think half of that includes the pandemic. He's with Caitlin, right? So can you see how when riding's not going well, then his relationship is going in the right direction? And I think Caitlin may have really liked that. I need my boyfriend to get serious. He is getting older in the sport. I need him to focus on me, right? So it may have suited her, all of that. But how did he feel about that? Bear in mind the pandemic was also going to end, right? Yeah, Elise says maybe more ready to settle down. Okay. Of course, on the other hand, when riding goes well, when the racing resumes, which it does, Mo happens. So how does it feel for Caitlin that their relationship achieves a certain fairy tale quality where they spend more and more time together? He's not off riding, he's not training as much. They, maybe he'll sleep in bed late kind of thing, certainly on weekends, and spend the weekends together and sort of hang out far more than they used to. And in that period where you had to be isolated or you were locked down, maybe their relationship, especially from her perspective, kind of blossomed. And then only for the racing to resume, and then what happens? How does she feel when that happens? Can you see how it's also a fairy tale for her, which then, well, does it become a nightmare as well? So going back to this article, he said, I think that my average this year has been 9 hours a week in 2021. Last year was low because I went into mountain bike mode because I felt all races would be cancelled, which they were. This is another image of Strickland from a documentary. You can actually see that he's wearing a bandana, which I think is he uses over his face when he goes into a restaurant. And I think he was doing publicity in the middle of kind of pandemic mode, maybe when he wasn't really feeling terribly happy. He was basically doing PR, singing a nice song, even though he wasn't really feeling like $1,000,000, right? In the middle of a difficult period for him. Anyways, he went on to say, let me just do this. He said, I was in good form in early 2020, and from then on, I just didn't up the mileage. I got distracted with other projects, like starting a business, and eventually the racing suffered. Well, who do you think he did that with? If he got distracted with other projects, well, who were those projects with? Who was he starting a business with? So can you see how it's like literally when the riding suffers, his relationship improves, the commitment involved in that, but also in their projects improves, right? It's almost like the commitment, the energy and the commitment that would go into racing and riding and training, all that energy, that collective amount of energy is now directed somewhere else, in Caitlin's direction, in the direction of their businesses. Do you see that? It's really just that huge amount of energy and focus and time and all of that is just being directed somewhere else, because there's no point in directing it towards races when they're all cancelled. And so when that happens, Caitlin's really happy. Wow, it's so nice that we're on the same page with this and we can do these things together, right? And meanwhile, Colin was actually feeling, let's just bring that back up. Colin was feeling you can't race at full gas. That kind of means at 100%, or beat the guys when you do that. When you're distracted, when you don't give 100% focus, he says you get 5th place when you do 9 hours a week. So when he started training less, obviously his achievements were worse. And so it's kind of like a vicious cycle. He trains less, he performs worse, and then he's not really motivated. And he's starting to wonder, is this what what do I want to do? Can you see how there's a kind of uncertainty creeping in? It's almost like I can't serve two masters. I must either cycle, I must either race, which is a very hard life, and quite a selfish life, or I must change course. But he's not quite sure if he wants to do that, right? He's not sure if he's ready to almost give up on not really his youth, but give up on a particular exciting chapter of his life. Can you see that that's where he is at this time, at the crucial time? He's literally in a bit of an existential crisis. Am I a racer? Am I still a racer? Should I still be a racer? Do I need to hang up my bike and get married and do the sort of 9-to-5 job? Is it time that I become a dad, or is it time that I continue to be the king and try and aspire to be the king? But even if he wants to do that, it sort of feels like I can't, because there are these these incredibly tough competitors that maybe he feels like he can't beat anymore, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so he goes on to say, that's been the biggest crutch for training. In the past, I'd race a lot, and we've always had a very robust early season in Texas, but it's all been disrupted. Now, in the script that I prepared here, I've highlighted these words in bold: biggest crutch, and it's all been disrupted. This is again quoting from this article in Cycling News, right? So all of this is happening in the run-up to this murder. Is the regular pattern of each cycling season has been totally disrupted. So his life has been disrupted. His training has been disrupted, but it's actually been, in a way, good for Caitlin, right? Because I'm a writer, I wrote this book. I keep referring to it, but I've written many other books. But because I'm particularly focused on diction, on word choices, on semantics, the words biggest crutch, kind of a strange choice of lexicon to use there. Think about those words: biggest crutch for training, biggest crutch for training. And isn't that how he thinks? Is that something's a crutch, or something's a this, or something's a that? He can be quite crass sometimes. He can use expletives and so on. But don't you think that that Caitlin sometimes felt that she was a crutch? That if he wasn't winning races, that she was basically paying for their life or whatever, right? It could be that that's not the case. Maybe he was making a lot of money anyway, or maybe she would make meals and facilitate his life, but he was like leaning on that, and she was kind of getting the short end of the stick, right? But it's just an interesting choice of words. It's basically saying he was depending on a certain system because for whatever reason he wasn't strong enough to not depend on that, right? So in a weird way, he's kind of saying that racing program was kind of a proxy for training, that he used those early season races to get himself fit. It was like a crutch. It was something that he could depend on rather than actually training on his own. And then taking that crutch away, he felt kind of exposed, that it was quite hard to be self-starting, self-motivating, right? And so all of this is taking place in the run-up to the incident, where he's actually feeling that weaknesses are exposed, cracks are exposed. He's struggling with motivation. He's disrupted. He's struggling, and he's also got a couple of injuries, right? He's not winning. And so in the slippery space, that's when mistakes start being made, and where weaknesses are exposed and mistakes are made and kind of worsened, right? He goes on to say, I could have done the hard miles myself. I could have done it. But some of these ex-World Tour guys are just better at training. I've realized I'm good at racing, but fuck, not at training. So you kind of get the idea that he lost focus in another way, where he sort of felt the ex-World Tour guys are better than him. And I mean, do you remember we spoke about him doing a, what was it, a 212-mile race or something like that, 210-mile race, where he just broke away at halfway. And I think Peter Stetina was one of the guys, and he just broke away and left him in the dust. And he showed how tough he was. He showed how tough he was there, but now he's almost looking in the mirror, and that toughness just isn't there. That toughness just isn't there. So to say these guys are just better at training, yeah, but you could have done it. You could have tried harder. You could have done that, but you believe that they were tougher. Can you see that? And then he said, I realized I'm not good at training. Yeah, but you realize that, well, then get better at training. It's easy to say. certainly easy to say. So what you can see is Strickland is mentally and physically tough, but also not. He lacks self-motivation. He lacks a sort of self-starting mojo. And you kind of also get the sense that he needs the spotlight to warm his inner fire. And what I mean is he basks in the glow of the race scenario. He enjoys the adrenaline. He enjoys the energy of the crowd. He enjoys that sort of visceral adrenaline rush. And if you take all of that away, then he struggles to just be on his own and find that fire, right? No, he's not a killer. So at this time that he's starting to lose focus, lose motivation, things are being disrupted, Mo Wilson kind of comes onto the scene. And she's almost everything that he wants to be at that point. He wants to be focused. She is. He wants to be winning. She is. He wants to be up and coming. She is. He wants to be young. She is. He wants a fresh start. She is. And from her perspective, she still kind of sees him the way a lot of the other riders see him, which is like that he's still the king. It's almost like he's woken up and realized, I can't do this. But the rest of the cycling world haven't really. Now, I can remember, and this is a bit self-indulgent, but I want to just give you that sense of almost panic, that sense of impending doom. I remember there's a time when I had long blonde hair. I was a triathlete and I had a ponytail, and I was lying with the back of my head, lying in the bath with the back of my head against a tiled wall, and I could actually feel sort of bald spots on my head touching the cold tile. And so, in other words, I could feel that I was going bald. Of course, you could see it, but I could sort of also feel it. And everyone else just saw, the long blonde hair and whatever. And I eventually just shaved my head, and I was like, it's over. And people were like, why did you do that? Are you crazy? Right? Well, it's because I knew what was coming and what was happening, right? And I think Colin did as well. It's that sense of it may not be absolute reality, but he can already feel it, right? So in the same article from Cycling Weekly, he says the form is coming. In the Rift in Iceland, Strickland was in the mix until illness took him out of contention. At that point, he was in the group of 3 that were set to decide the race, and Stetina eventually came out on top. Do you guys remember who Peter Stetina is? Do you remember? He's kind of got blonde hair and he's got a moustache. So it looks like Stetina is almost like his foil. He's the guy who would always push him into second place, right? And once again, you see some bad luck coming in. He's hurt his knee, and then there's also illness. But the point is not winning anymore. He's struggling to win. Then he says, again, quoting from this article in Cycling News, he said, at some point, my form will kick in. I just can't guarantee it's there yet. I'll probably just race conservatively, and it might take a few more long races, but sooner or later it will happen. Right now, I'm the kid who shows up for class, but didn't do the homework. Everyone else has done it, but not me. So there he provides, and again, this is also from this article, Cycling News. There he kind of sketches out his own psychology, where he says, I haven't done my homework. Everyone else has done it, but not me. And what does that tell you? It tells you he feels unsettled. He feels unprepared. He feels left behind. He feels anxious. He feels stressed. All of those things. at this as we're going into 2022. That's how he's feeling. Thanks, Stephanie. So he's in a period of struggling. He's not only struggling with his body, with illness and injury, but he's also struggling with his mind, where he feels like, I'm struggling to motivate myself. I'm struggling to beat these guys in my own mind, right? Can you see that? So he's kind of an odd duck. He doesn't do the work and sort of races from the gut, from the fire in his belly perspective, right? And now we're going to go back to the New Yorker article. Where is that? So everything we've kind of dealt with, or most of what we've dealt with now, actually comes from a cycling news article that was in 2021. Now we're going to really get down to brass tacks. Okay. So this is quoting from the article. He says, it's depressing because it's your job and your identity. Those are powerful words. He's talking about slipping off the podium. He's talking about his failures in the sport, right? Targel Tran says, does anyone know Strickland's level of education? I think he studied to be an environmental consultant, as far as I know, at the University of Texas. But can you see his job is riding, and he's struggling at his job, and his identity is also that he's a rider, right? He's a bicycle rider. So he's struggling really in two crucial aspects. His work, which is his day-to-day, you know, activity, actions, you know, all of that, the energy and the activities and the focus day to day. He's struggling with that. He's struggling with his job. He's struggling also with who he is. And the fact that he actually says that, it's depressing because it's your identity. You can see that he probably is starting to think, I do need to hang up the bicycle. I need to become a dad. And that idea depresses him. And you can kind of imagine a lot of good athletes face that dilemma of, you know, it's all downhill from here. You know, if I get married, I'm just going to become slow, fat, unfit, just an average Joe, and I'm just going to become like everybody else in the suburbs. I used to kind of be Superman. I used to be awesome. And now it's going back to normal. And do you want to let go of that? Do you want to let go of that really special, magical time of your life, right? And probably what he wants to do is go out on his own terms. He wants to go out on top. He wants to be a success. He wants to win races and then retire, right? He doesn't want to retire kind of as a loser. He doesn't want to retire or fall out of the sport on the back of a string of failures, right? But does he have the energy to get back onto the horse, right? Because again, you've got these world-class riders that have now come into the sport. Does he have it in him to, you know, to reach back to that level? And that's the crisis that he's facing. So he goes on to say, so this is from the article, in an Instagram post, his frustration about losing and perhaps about losing control of a fledgling sport that he'd helped define sounded even more raw, right? Such great words. In other words, Ian Parker is describing the feeling, the essence of the feeling Colin Strickland is feeling as raw. It's like, you know, if you think about meat that's not cooked, it's raw. He feels like his own soul has been, he's bared his soul. He's feeling raw and exposed and vulnerable, right? And often when you feel like that, in an emotional sense, you can be either reckless or foolish or both, right? But there, look at these words: frustration about losing control, right? He had actually created the sport in a way, it kind of defined the sport. And now it's kind of unraveled without him. It's kind of continuing without him. And he feels kind of lost, right? He feels kind of devastated. So this is what he wrote. He wrote, I have been less than impressed with the level of sportsmanship shown by many in the gravel field of late. He said something, now addressing competitors, he said, competitors who try to eke out sleazy time advantages on other riders. You are a shit, and you probably don't have what it takes to win anyway. That is his headspace. Is kind of blaming and angry and feeling like a victim and feeling like it's someone else's fault and all that kind of thing, right? He's taking pot shots at other riders. Now, I don't quite know what it means by eke out sleazy time advantages. I'm not quite sure what that is. I don't know. I don't know what that's referring to. But that's how he's feeling. He's disgruntled. He's unhappy. So within this context of shit and disruption, illness and underperformance, Caitlin finally comes to the fore in Ian Parker's narrative, right? We've gone through this narrative, it's a really long form narrative, and here at last, Caitlin actually makes an appearance in this long narrative that's really about about Colin. This is basically the first time she makes an appearance in the narrative. It's in this quote. Strickland and Armstrong took a trip to Iceland that July. That's July 2021. Soon afterward, Amity Rockwell spent a few days in Boulder, Colorado, in a house where Strickland was also a guest. So I'm going to just slow down and break this quote into two pieces. Okay, this is from Ian Parker's article. So I want to just break this quote into two pieces. The first is to say, in the summer of 2021, Colin and Caitlin go to Iceland, and there's actually photos before he took down his Instagram. There are a couple of photos here and there of Caitlin, right? And then immediately after that, he gets back, and then he goes to Boulder, where Amity Rockwell is, his former, whatever you want to say, former fling, former girlfriend, former cycling partner, whatever. And so he comes back from that trip with Caitlin, and he goes to Boulder, and he's now staying in this house with Amity Rockwell. And she says the following: he aggressively pursued me. And according to the article, Amity rebuffed him while wrongly assuming that he was single. Well, when I read that, that's what I see. That's what I see. What do you guys see? He comes back from Iceland, he goes to Boulder, and this was a chance for him and Caitlin to bond, I guess. But as soon as he gets back, well, according to Amity, he's acting like a guy who's not in a relationship or not in a serious relationship. This is July. This is something that we haven't really seen before. This is news, right? This is something we didn't know. So if you, Caitlin Armstrong, reading this, right, either at the time, like if you knew this was going on, either at the time or in retrospect, what is suddenly raised and started flapping wildly in the wind is this. That's if you're Caitlin. So in other words, whether Caitlin knew this or not, a red flag was waving over her as early as, let's say, August 2021. And that's why it's so important to sketch the fabric that he was going through. It wasn't just that he had other feelings in terms of the opposite sex. He was also in a very I'm not trying to make excuses for him. I'm just trying to say that the overall situation he was in was very unsettled, and his ego had probably taken a beating, right? Okay. Then going back to the article, he said, this is Ian Parker speaking, he said, I first spoke to Rockwell a few weeks after Wilson's murder, and at that time she was wary of mentioning Strickland's overture. She was wary of being honest or being forthcoming or being open about that time when they were in the same house. And then she said the following. This was also really shocking. She said, that got my best friend killed. I'm not quite sure what she means by that. I don't know whether she means the fact that she didn't really want to talk about him flirting with her, or that thing from his side that it's obviously an allegation she's making, but that tendency or that pattern or that action that she's accusing him of, in her opinion, that got her best friend killed, right? Not quite sure what she means exactly by that, but what that's also telling you is that her best friend is Mo Wilson. Mo Wilson's best friend is Amity Rockwell. Can you see how things are starting to come together? No, it wasn't after that. No, this was in August 2021. But that makes sense. Amity was from San Francisco. Mo was as well, although I think she was originally from Vermont. And since they were both rising stars and a similar age, it was natural that they would become friends. Also, it's perhaps through Amity's friendship with Mo that Strickland met her. Often relationships are born out of it doesn't work with one person and then you meet their best friend, right? That sometimes happens. This is a picture of Mo on the left, and do you know who that is on the right? Do you know who that is on the right-hand side? Anyone know who the guy with the mustache is in the right? I think it's Peter Stetina. That is the guy that was beating Colin Strickland, right? So these are both rising stars, Mo and Peter, right? So in Ian Parker's article, he kind of provides a disclaimer here and basically says, Caitlin has not been convicted of a crime. Strickland has not been charged with any crime either. But then he goes on to say, Amity Rockwell recalled that whenever Strickland had to explain his relationship with Armstrong to other people who didn't know them well, he gave the impression Armstrong was difficult, volatile, that she was a difficult, volatile ex from whom he couldn't quite disentangle himself. That comes from Amity Rockwell. That's her statement. According to Amity Rockwell, Colin gave the impression that Caitlin was difficult, volatile, and that he couldn't kind of get away from her. Does volatile equals jealous? Does volatile equals jealous? Well, doesn't it? Anyway, he goes on to say, so Ian Parker goes on to say that Amity said, we're stuck in this business relationship. And I think that was something that came out in a later article as well, where he said something similar as well, that at a certain point, Caitlin was trying to see other men, and that they also kind of had a business relationship. But then he said the same thing about Mo when Mo died, that it was strictly platonic. So is he having strictly platonic relationships with everyone? Who does he love then? Who does he care about? What does he love? What does he care about? Notice it's we are stuck. He is stuck, she is stuck. But perhaps she is stuck more and sticking with him than he is. If you take, I mean, we don't know if that's true, but if you take it at face value, right? If you take that verbatim quote at face value, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm stuck with you, you stuck with me? Does it mean one of us is more stuck than the other? Like, what does that actually mean? Why would he be stuck? Which one is more stuck than the other? And isn't, I mean, this is a question. Doesn't Colin seem like a fair weather kind of guy, even in his own sport? Is he a guy who sticks to anything? In other words, when the going gets, I don't want to say tough because he's a tough guy, but when the going gets tough enough or the going gets too tough, does he just not stick? Think about the mental toughness that's involved in getting married to someone, having a kid with someone, having a serious relationship with someone. That also requires discipline. Does he have that, right? It's almost when he said, no, I don't want to go and ride Paris-Roubaix because it's just going to be too hard, right? Is it because he kind of just wants to have fun, right? I don't think he's not tough. I just think there's perhaps a shallowness to that toughness, or it's somewhat one-dimensional, right? Anyway, going back to the article, Sammy Runnels, a professional cyclist who's known Strickland for many years, described him as someone inclined to play games with a romantic partner until it explodes into drama. So there we've got another really important addition to our knowledge base from a totally different source. Someone called Sammy Runnels. She says he seems to play games. He plays games until it explodes. Think about those words, right? I don't know whether this is true. This is what Sammy Runnels says. It's what Ian Parker has quoted her saying. I think it's a her. But think about those words. Does he play games, right? Well, wasn't he playing games with Mo? If he wasn't, did it feel like he was playing games? Did it seem like he was playing? Did Caitlin feel like if she figured out that he was going to the shallow eddy pool with Mo and having dinner with Mo that night, didn't it feel to her that he was playing games with her? And how did she feel about that? How does anyone feel about it when you're in a relationship and someone else is playing games? It's a nice feeling. And if you play games and you have an argument and you play games and you have an argument, okay, don't worry, I won't do that again. Eventually it does, if the person doesn't change their behavior, it does eventually explode. Didn't that explode into drama in the sense that there was yet another accident waiting to happen based on a man behaving recklessly within his own relationship? If you think about this idea, if you think about almost like in the Rust incident with Alec Baldwin, it's not just a 1 in a trillion random fragmented thing taking place. It's lots of live rounds lying all over the place and lots of other things going on. In the same way in this, it's not just I was a bit reckless one time in one relationship, right? Isn't it a pattern of something like that? Is there a pattern of playing games? Is there a pattern of of love triangles, of silently, secretly pursuing something on the side? That's what the trial is going to have to find out. They're going to have to probably speak to some of the previous girlfriends that Colin has had and find out what was this a pattern or not. They're going to have to establish that. But it's a really interesting statement saying he was inclined to play games until it exploded into drama. Isn't that the summary of what happened to Mo Wilson? Isn't that the entire plot of the story summarized in one sentence? So going back to the article, in September 2021, Red Bull announced its first sponsored gravel race. So that's where we are in our timeline. And this kind of presents potentially a moment of redemption for Colin. He can kind of make a comeback now. It's the end of 2021. It's coming up to the end of 2021. This is his chance to shine again. This is his chance to get back onto the throne. This is his chance to get the fairy tale back. Well, what do you think happens? Do you think he does? The murder date was the 11th of May this year. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, May 11, the night of May 11, 2022, around about somewhere around 9 p.m. Okay. So now we're at September 2021. And Red Bull, his sponsor, said that they were going to do this really big race, and they promoted it as the brainchild of Strickland and a guy called Payson McElveen, the Adventure Stash guy, right? And so this is actually Colin's own idea. It was his own, what's the word? His own concept, right? He, I guess, pitched it to Red Bull, and then Red Bull took it on, and so Red Bull were now going to sponsor it, right? And that race was scheduled for that November. So it's going to take place. I think they presented the idea in September at a party in September, but it was scheduled for November at a ranch resort in West Texas. Again, this was Colin's moment to shine, to reclaim the throne, reclaim the crown, right? Now, going back to the article, the event called Red Bull Rio Grande Gravel was being run by Andrew Willis, the Driveway Series producer. Willis had known Strickland for a decade, and he told the writer of this article, Ian Parker, that he had always thought Colin was a good dude. So this is quoting from the article, quote, Andrew Willis was puzzled when Strickland became a sour, capricious race planning partner. These are his words. I mean, these are the words from the article. He'd known this guy for a long time, and he's quite confused. Strickland's become sour, capricious, unhappy. What's going on? Why is this guy losing motivation, losing his sense of self, sort of seems to be all over the place, losing focus? What is going on? What does it mean to be capricious? And I mean, we looked at that one Instagram post where he called someone a shit and doing something sleazy, right? Capricious means, let's bring it up here. It means fickle, inconstant, changeable, variable, unstable, mercurial, but it also means volatile, erratic, irregular, fitful, freakish, unpredictable, haphazard. You can think of a mountain that is prone to producing avalanches as capricious, that there's something cruel sometimes in that unpredictability. The opposite of capricious is stable. The opposite of capricious is consistent. So you're really thinking about someone who is unstable or less stable than usual, or inconsistent or less consistent than usual, right? This is all going into the end of 2021, where he would then go and purchase 2 firearms, right? So going back to the article, he had pressed for a route, meaning Colin Strickland had insisted on a particular route that included a mining ghost town. In Willis's mind, a tourist trap. So in Willis's mind, he didn't really want to go that route. Then after it was granted, after they said, okay, we'll go through there, then apparently I think Colin objected to the Cibolo Creek Ranch as not being authentic. He had argued for a very hard race over Willis's objections, then protested that the route was too hard. The impression I get is that because he's the king of gravel riding, he feels quite entitled. So he can create races that suit him. And maybe in the beginning, when he was creating the race, he thought, I needed to be hard so that I'm going to shine. But maybe he found either that I'm lacking motivation or my injury still hasn't been sorted out. Well, now I need it to be not so hard. In other words, I need it both ways. I need the race really hard. Oh, hang on, I'm not feeling so great. Can we make it not so hard? Can you guys see that? So, as I say, Strickland seems to want to have his cake and eat it. There seems to be a sense of entitlement. Is that what being the golden boy of sport does to you? Is that what rising stars become? Do they become sour? Is that what happened? Did he become a little bit sour? Did success go to his head, or was it just bad luck? I mean, he could obviously answer that. He could kind of say, this is what the situation was, right? Obviously, this is someone's opinion. This is the opinion of this writer. I suppose Colin could bring his Instagram back on and say, well, this is the other side of the story. That and that, whatever. Anyway, going back to the article, quote, in late September, after riders had already paid for the Rio Grande, Strickland abruptly withdrew his support. As Willis put it, he threw a temper tantrum. I'm just quoting from this article. I'm not saying this, I'm quoting from the article. Red Bull called off the race. So this is a big deal. He apparently got angry. Red Bull called off the race, citing operational issues. The event was later rescheduled for the spring, so the next year. But Red Bull now refrained from using Strickland's face in its marketing. That is also a huge thing that I didn't know. It shows you that even his relationship with his own sponsor now was taking strain. What is going on? You would imagine that he would treat Red Bull like gold. I mean, didn't he turn his back on Paris-Roubaix, the whole European one-day race circuit? Didn't he turn his back on them because of Red Bull? He wanted to hold on to Red Bull. Now, even Red Bull is not feeling terribly happy. One promotional photo shows his back. In another, his head is sharply turned from the camera. And all of this is prior to the murder. All of this is it's like a slow motion train wreck, right? Things are going from bad to worse. Remember I said, is this chance that he's got to get back on the throne, the chance he's got to put the crown back on his head, what do you think is happening? Well, he's not really doing that. It's almost like he's slipping even further down on the way to trying to get back on the throne. What's going on? Now we jump to October of 2021. Okay, quoting from the article, on October 23rd, Strickland, Wilson, and Rockwell, right? Amity Rockwell, best friend of Wilson, they rode in a race called Big Sugar in Arkansas. Wilson won the women's field, so she's doing well. She's doing well. At a party that night, she and Rockwell ran into Caitlin Armstrong and Strickland. Strickland came ninth in his race, barely ahead of Wilson. Armstrong was pointedly unfriendly, according to this article, in a way that Rockwell now reads as a reflection of the position that Colin was continually putting her in through his dealings with other women. By then, Wilson and Strickland had certainly met each other at one race or another, although Rockwell, according to the article, is confident that their relationship so far had been platonic. Going to the next paragraph, quote, at some point that weekend, Wilson, who had just broken up with her boyfriend, this is October, told Rockwell that she had decided to take a short vacation in Austin, where she had friends. That's where this whole saga began. Now, do you remember from what we know from the affidavit and from what Colin Strickland said is that him and Caitlin took a break in, I think was it October going into November or September going into October? But anyway, somewhere around there. Now, according to this, on the 23rd, they meet at a party, and it looks like after that, or around that time, Mo had broken up with her boyfriend. And what I suspect happened was that maybe Colin pursued her, flirted with her, was friendly to her, and Mo responded. Rockwell says that's when this whole saga began, meaning, the way I understand it, that was the beginning of this dynamic. That's the way I understand it. So it does seem like Amity Rockwell is potentially a very important witness in this case, who understands these dynamics, right? It also makes me wonder if Amity is one of the secret tipsters referred to in the affidavit, those who called the tip line. Now we go to 3 days later, going back to this article. It's such a great article. If you haven't read it, I'm going to put the link in chat again. So this is quoting from the article. 3 days later, on October 26th, Strickland and Armstrong's trailer renovation company, Wheelhouse Mobile, was incorporated, right? So can you see how everything is coming to a head? Someone is breaking up. The relationship with Red Bull is getting strained because his focus is here, there, and everywhere. Also, what's the other thing? Okay, so it says here, quote, 2 days later, Andrew Willis hosted the last driveway event of the 2021 season. Strickland and Wilson rolled up together. They arrived together for that race. So that's in October. That's the end of October. So obviously at this point, he's now like in the middle of their company, in the middle of their business relationship, Colin and Caitlin's business relationship being like tied up. Colin is playing, well, I don't know what you want to call it, playing a game, getting involved in another relationship, whatever you want to call that. According to Tolly, quote, Colin and an attractive female cyclist, a girl who's not Caitlin. Well, who else could that be? Strickland couldn't be expected to be inconspicuous because there were photos from the evening showing him wearing a Red Bull helmet. Wilson was in cut-off jeans and a pink tie-dyed sweatshirt. Seems like tie-dyed clothing should also not be worn if you want to not be part of true crime. Anyway, from the end of this paragraph, as Tolly observed, Caitlin knew all the other female cyclists. She was good friends with them. So it's a very public thing to bring another girl. And then he added, it just kind of sucks. So the impression I get is that Caitlin was kind of humiliated by that. Like that was already not the last straw, but that was already kind of a slap in the face. That's the impression you get. I mean, Tolly's saying it just kind of sucks. I think that's certainly how Caitlin felt. Like it's not just pitching up with someone else, like everyone sees that. So what are you supposed to do? And I think it just kind of sucks in October wasn't the first time possibly, and it was also not the last time. Maybe in May it just kind of sucks again, right? According to Rockwell, Wilson's phone rang that evening. So in other words, someone must have seen her in photos, in Instagrams, maybe on television, somewhere. Wilson's phone rang that evening, the evening of October 26th, when she and Strickland were at the racetrack. It was an unknown number, but she took the call, and a woman told her, stay away from Colin. And who is the witness to this? Who is telling us the story? Amity Rockwell. Isn't she the tipster? Isn't she the tipster that we haven't known about until now? But here it is, stay away from Colin. Now, if you think about that, why doesn't she say that to Colin? Colin, stay away from Mo. Maybe she's been saying it. Maybe she has been saying it. And maybe she sort of, in a weird way, I don't want to say accepts, but maybe she's reached a point where she feels like she's got to intervene now because that person won't stop, right? Going back to the article, in one of Strickland's interviews with the police, he reported the fact of a phone call, but not this setting. So we are now getting all of our entire knowledge base in terms of the affidavit is now starting to stretch, to expand. We're starting to be able to potentially put names and settings and dates to some of those events in the affidavit. Wilson reacted to this, to stay away from Colin, by saying That was really weird. Some random person called me. Strickland described the caller as his ex-girlfriend. And he said, I felt so ashamed of that. I felt so ashamed that that happened. Why did he feel ashamed? Did he feel ashamed because Caitlin had called Mo, or because he should have been loyal to Caitlin? Like, why was he ashamed? Was he ashamed because Mo was uncomfortable? Why was he ashamed? At a Halloween party that weekend, so now we know where we are in terms of that, Strickland wore overalls and no shirt. This is according to this article. He played the guitar in a two-piece band called Dirt Daddy. Strickland and Wilson also took a trip together to West Texas. So we're getting a sense now that it wasn't just a one-off thing, that they also, seems like they went to a Halloween party together. You can tell what the date is there, the very end of October. Then they also went on a little trip to West Texas together. All of this is around the context of him and Caitlin's trailer business being incorporated and the investments involved in that. It's almost like the moment gravel riding resumed, he became a different person. Doesn't it feel like that? Like when all the races were cancelled, Colin was this nice boyfriend. But then when the riding resumed, then he was off riding and to quote somebody else, possibly playing games. Wasn't this a game that was taking place? Anyway, in a state, this is quoting from the article, in a statement that Strickland released this past May, so this is just referring to the affidavit, where he said, I had a brief romantic relationship lasting a week or so. He emphasized, according to the article, that both of them had recently broken up with their partners. After the fling, his dealings with Wilson became platonic and professional. That's his version of it. And then this is the part that kind of gets a bit bizarre. Right? This definitely gets a bit bizarre. So where do you think he goes once he's had the Halloween party, once he's come back from, I think, West Texas? What do you think happens after that? Well, he's got to go home. And guess who is at home? Right? He's got to go home, but he lives with Caitlin. So, we've both broken up. Mo's single, I'm single, but then he goes home to Caitlin. It's not a really good situation. So according to this article, they lived under the same roof but were separated. But then they soon reunited. You kind of get the idea that he went and had a fling and then came back and he continued in their relationship. You kind of get that impression. I don't know if that's true. According to the article, when Wilson returned to San Francisco, this is really important. This is really important. Let's just slow down a little bit. So he comes back to Austin and home, and Caitlin's there, and they apparently were separated, but they reunite soon after that, right? She may be stung, but all is forgiven, well, until you do this again, kind of thing. Promise me you'll never, ever do this again. You can imagine a conversation like that. Anyway, what about Mo? Mo then returns to San Francisco, and she's also returning to someone who's going to talk to her. And that person is Amity Rockwell. And Amity is going to say, I need to talk to you. You need to know what you're getting yourself into. And that's exactly what happens. According to the article, Mo told Rockwell a little bit about what had happened with Colin in their little fling, in their time together. And Amity said, I think Mo saw a lot of potential there. After that fling, Amity said it seemed like Mo saw a lot of potential for their relationship. And then so this is how Rockwell responded. She said, I tried to steer Mo away from Colin. I told her everything I knew about the situation. Now, if you think about this, Amity Rockwell is in a unique situation, literally to save Mo's life, to say, listen to me. This is not a good situation for you. You're not the first person to get caught in this, that, and the next thing, right? There's no better person to talk to Mo than Amity, to say, listen to me, this is the situation. But you can almost imagine Mo thinking at the back of her mind, even if she doesn't really want to think this, but you can imagine her thinking, you saying this maybe because maybe you still like Colin, right? Maybe there's that aspect. In other words, it's not coming from a purely altruistic thing. You're not just thinking about me. Maybe you still got feelings for Colin, or maybe your feelings are clouded by something, right? This is my chance. Like, I found someone, I really like him. And so she may not treat the source of that information as seriously as she wants to. And part of it might just be like, yeah, well, I want to, whatever you say, I want this. I want this. There may be red flags, but I want to find out for myself, right? So she gets another big red flag. Rockwell said that Wilson listened to her, but she said, and this is quoting from the article, I didn't get a clear, I want nothing more to do with that. So she spoke to her, but she didn't really get a sense of clarity. Like, I see what you're saying. I've been warned. I got it, right? And I think the answer is that she didn't, that she felt, okay, I'll bear that in mind. I'll kind of keep an open mind. And then that's when the odd decision happened. We're now getting to the end of 2021, and that is when Colin Strickland bought 2 handguns, a 6-hour for Caitlin Armstrong, a different weapon for himself. He told investigators that, according to the article, that Christine Armstrong, her sister, and Caitlin went to a gun range together. And everyone said, all the bike people that Ian Parker spoke to said they found the gun purchases confounding. It reminds me of the Oscar Pistorius case, where if he couldn't sleep, if he was struggling with insomnia, he would go to the gun range and shoot. It's like, if you ask me if you've got insomnia, like, what's the worst way to try and get yourself to sleep? Well, shoot, use an object that makes extremely loud bangs, and then try and go back to sleep. It's kind of the same thing. Like, so many things aren't going really well. There's so much instability. There's so much emotional fluctuation. Do you really want to buy a gun at this time? But anyway, the point is just that his own friends, I guess, in Texas thought, cheapers, why did you buy a gun in this situation? Why buy a gun for Caitlin? You can buy a gun for yourself. Why for her as well? And then now we're going to deal with the very end of 2021. going back to this article, quote, partly owing to Strickland's influence, gravel bike manufacturers and race organizers were overly fond of language about ungoverned men with weapons. For example, the Renegade Rambler, a Texan event granting cowboy status to sponsors, providing a certain level of funding. But all that was understood to be just storytelling. It's just a little bit of culture around this idea that, and bear in mind that Colin Strickland was kind of like a celebrity, this gravel rider. It does make you wonder whether he didn't start thinking about himself as a cowboy. I mean, he did want the one race to go through a sort of a cowboy ranch area. And it just sort of makes you wonder, didn't he want to sort of make that part of his branding, you know? Wasn't he going to use that cowboy aspect? Wasn't the idea that he wanted to bring that into his marketing, right? You might say it was a dumb idea, but maybe the idea for it came out of branding. I don't know if you remember with Oscar Pistorius, he marketed himself as the Blade Runner, like as fast as a bullet being fired from a gun, right? Do you remember that? Amy Charity, who runs a popular gravel race in Colorado, this is also quoting from the article, said, this is a quote from her. She said, "You don't have an unhinged girlfriend and buy her a gun. It looks like he made really poor decisions." I don't think anyone can say it better than that. So we've seen quite a few words to describe Caitlin. Volatile. What is the other one? Well, here is another one, unhinged. I'm just trying to think what it was. Volatile. Let me just see if I can find it. It's a little bit up here. But it seems like he can also be, I mean, look at some of the words in this article to describe him. Temper tantrum, sour, capricious, argued, seemed unhappy, plays games, explodes into drama, we're stuck. Oh, difficult. That's another word, difficult. But don't you get a sense that he's also difficult? Okay, so we're coming to the end of 2021. And so the final thing to say is that Chris Tolley defended Strickland's purchase of these weapons by saying, you know, he was wheeling and dealing in Texas, in the rural parts of Texas, selling these trailers. So, like, what do you expect? So there were some people defending him, but a lot didn't. A lot thought buying a weapon under those circumstances, obviously in hindsight, seems particularly crazy. Okay, so let's go to 2022. Just going to bring up another image. Okay. So it seems good to have you back here. Elise, good to see you as well. Okay, let's continue. So let's now we are in 2022. We in the end game. Do you guys see how amazing investigative journalism can be to simply piece together a narrative, but it brings together so much. It brings together times, dates, places, dynamics, witnesses, all of that, just through somebody investigating, through somebody trying to figure out what the story is. That's all it is. It does the work of a lawyer. It does the work of a detective. It does the work of a policeman. It does the work of a prosecutor. It does the work, in a way, of a jury, right? Someone asked a question about drugs. I've got to say, intuitively, and I could be totally wrong here, but intuitively, erratic behavior, when you start behaving erratically, and I'm not talking about Mo, Colin, or Caitlin here specifically, I'm just generally speaking, when you start behaving in a way that's more erratic than usual, it may be because you are consuming something that alters your moods and alters that aspect. And maybe if you're unhappy and lacking in motivation, you need a bit of a pickup. Maybe you need a substance. Maybe you need something to boost you. So one does wonder whether that's a factor here. Of course, that's just speculation. So going back to the article, most of Strickland's relationship with Armstrong remains hidden from public view. That's already a really interesting point. Why is it hidden? Why is most of it hidden? Going back to the article quote, but Tolly, describing her position said, you're dating someone for coming up on 3 years and you're in your mid-30s. She was 34. And you're at a point where, like, you don't want to get fucked around anymore, especially when there's something that, you know, feels real. That's where she's coming from. That's where she's coming from. Isn't that how she's experiencing it? You could call it playing games, but you can also call it that it feels like being fucked around, and no better words than that. It feels exactly like those two words, because isn't it like those two words? So it feels like I've got something real. It feels like you're so close to your fairy tale, marriage, kids, with this great guy, this incredible athlete who can be quite sweet and who's quite fun and who likes traveling or whatever. And I'm so close to that. I just wish he would, if he can just stop riding, maybe he can focus on me. Armstrong, in a conversation with Tolly, once described herself as being too jealous to ever have agreed to be in an open relationship. That's also a huge statement that, if it's true, it rubbishes the whole thing from this whole thing about that she's not jealous. In other words, if what Tolly said is true, if Armstrong did have a conversation with him and maybe he asked her, are you in an open relationship with Colin? Maybe she said, you know what, I'm far too jealous for that. And I think many people might say the same thing. No, I wouldn't tolerate an open relationship. In this article alone, how many people have either implicitly or explicitly suggested that Armstrong was or might be jealous? Now, this comes from the media narrative. Look at that. In new court documents filed by attorneys, Strickland told cops that Armstrong was not a jealous person, described her as the least volatile woman he had dated. Does that ring true? here's something else. Law enforcement's theory, this is Kofa's argument. This is Kofa's argument as Caitlin's defense counsel, is that within the first 24 hours, law enforcement rushed to judgment. They didn't consider any other possibilities, and they decided Caitlin was a crazy, jealous person. Was she? I don't think she was crazy. And I think some behavior would drive anyone to jealousy. Like, you can be a fairly calm, settled, stable person, but another person acting in a certain way, flirtatiously, repeatedly, playing games repeatedly, is going to make you feel jealous, even if you're not really a jealous person. Going back to the article, in the last weekend in January, Strickland and Wilson were both guests at an international bike event in Arkansas. Now we're at the end of January. Strickland was also there with Armstrong. At the end of the weekend, Wilson messaged Strickland, we know this from the affidavit, saying, wow, this weekend was strange for me. I don't know what's going on. If you just want to be friends, then that's cool. But I'd like to talk about it because honestly, my mind has been going in circles and I don't know what to think. Strickland responded to that saying, I feel very shitty putting you in the position you were in. So he's kind of apologetic, as Ian Parker notes in that article, but he's not really clarifying. He's not saying, well, this is the situation. He's like, I feel shitty about what you felt or saw. He's not saying, this is the situation. Isn't he playing a game? In Strickland's interview with Ali, wasn't he the same, not clarifying? And isn't it because Strickland wouldn't say that Caitlin was jealous, that Kofa felt he could say with some authority that Caitlin wasn't jealous? What I'm trying to get at is, isn't the reason why Caitlin's defense lawyer could be so certain, so strong in his argument that Caitlin wasn't jealous was because her boyfriend wasn't going to say that. Yeah, you do get that sense. You do get that sense. Elise says classic game playing being vague. Okay, so going back to the article, I'm going to jump to May 7th, right? So now we are 4 days before the murder. Chris Tolley attended the rescheduled Red Bull Rio Grande event. Now think about what we are dealing with. This Red Bull Rio Grande event is actually Collins. This is the event that he kind of fucked up the previous year because he had a temper tantrum, according to the article. But it's kind of his sponsor, his it's designed to suit him. And again, it's this kind of moment where, Colin, you can get your fairy tale right now. If you win this race, you can be the king of the world, kind of thing. Can you see? It's 4 days before the murder. That's how all of these mechanisms and gears are coming into place. And this particular event's really important. This event's also what brings Mo Wilson into town, right? And the irony is, Okay, so let's go to that. So Strickland and Armstrong arrived at this event together. They just met, this according to the article. Let's go, just bring that article up. Again, I'm quoting from Ian Parker's article. So he says, Strickland and Armstrong arrived together. They had just met up again after Strickland had completed a road trip during which he'd lived out of a Dodge truck that he'd modified himself, adding a platform with a tent on top. He'd seen family. He and Wilson had ridden a race in Monterey, California, then taken a training ride together in Santa Cruz. So between January and May, Caitlin and Colin were kind of not together, in the sense that he was somewhere and she was somewhere else. But where he was, Mo was as well. Mo was racing, and where he was training, Mo was training, right? And so I think you can ask the question, in that situation where he's away from home with other riders, doesn't he think he can play it both ways? That he can, when he's on the road, be with the one you're with, and when he's back in Austin, then he's back in a relationship. Doesn't it seem that way? Was it that way? A day and a half later, according to this article, quote, Strickland and Armstrong met Tolly for breakfast. So I guess this is a day and a half later. So is it the 8th or the middle of the 9th? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, a day and a half later, Strickland and Armstrong met Tolly for breakfast at a deli an hour north of the ranch, where they were joined by a video crew. Tolly had arranged to interview Strickland for a YouTube series. I'm not going to say what it is. The crew began shooting at breakfast. So Armstrong's there, and they're shooting something on YouTube, and they followed. The crew followed the two men as they rode uphill, talking. At the top, Colin and someone else engaged in a bit of comic business, I guess, in a bit of casual conversation. Tolly told Ian Parker, that he had stowed some runway clothes in the crew's vehicle and had invited Strickland to help him pick out an outfit for cycling's Met Gala, the upcoming inauguration of Gravel's Hall of Fame. This part really sticks out, and I've kind of I just want to highlight it here. Right? In Tolly's memory, Strickland said that he'd lost the will to train for competitions. It was like, why the fuck am I still doing this? So we've come to this point where this is his event. This is all about his event. He's the big daddy he's the dirt daddy of gravel riding. He's got this big sponsor in Red Bull, and he's saying, I've kind of lost the will to do this, right? Why am I even doing it? Can you see he's kind of going through an existential crisis, and he knows it. And this is 2 days before the murder. Strickland hadn't done well in a big race for a long time. The event that he'd helped promote half-heartedly had attracted few big names. Nevertheless, he had come in third. He seemed tired. So this was his big opportunity, and I guess he didn't do too badly. He came third, but it didn't really attract any big names. And he comes out of that basically saying, why the fuck am I still doing this? According to this article, Strickland gave an interview that was published online a week earlier. So basically, within about 10 days of Mo's death, he actually spoke about retirement. And there were photos of Strickland with his trailers, along with, let me quote from this, it's quite important. Quote, it was accompanied, so this article about him talking about retirement was accompanied by a dozen photos of Strickland and his trailers, along with an uncaptioned photograph of Armstrong, who's not mentioned in the text. She's sitting in a trailer kitchen looking uneasy. I can't help reading that and just thinking, doesn't she feel bothered that he's on Instagram constantly? I'm writing here, I'm doing this here, I'm photographed with this person. Doesn't she feel like, why don't you tell people that you're with me? Like, why don't you make it obvious on social media that we're in a relationship? And the fact that he doesn't that bother her? Because isn't it a sign of something? Is it possible also that Armstrong had laid down the law, that she'd said, demanded even, that he begin to acknowledge her in social media, that he needed to stop everything. He needed to stop riding. And besides letting the world know that they were a couple, and maybe he was even starting to do that, but he needed to start letting go of everything and eventually taking on this more mature role, which maybe never done before, but this more mature role as someone who's part of a relationship, part of a business, not the glitzy glamour celebrity cyclist, but this other life. And maybe that's why he felt also very lost and depressed and irritated. Okay, going back to this article, Tolly's video with Strickland has not been released, so you can't see it on YouTube. But Tolly showed Ian Parker a clip from that. And so Strickland is asked a question about the oddest thing he's been asked to endorse. What's the funniest thing you've been asked to endorse? And he responded by saying, he was approached by the manufacturer of a masturbatory aid. Tolly and Strickland talk over each other for a moment before Strickland says in a mock affront, I could have a girlfriend if I wanted. It was a jokey, quoting from the article, it was a jokey remark, but Tolly was taken aback. In an exchange that would be seen by thousands, Strickland seemed to be muddling the status of the woman with whom they'd both just been filmed having breakfast. So even Tolly, who seems like he quite likes Strickland and defends him, is actually taken aback by his surprising statements and, I guess, behavior. Okay. Is that basically the fabric of this case and why it happened? That because the relationship with a woman was being muddled, right? Let me say that again. Because the relationship with a woman was being muddled, the status of that relationship, not once, but often and seriously, deliberately, systematically, that's why there was a love triangle in the first place. How can you not have a muddled sense of who is with you when a love triangle exists? How can you not have a how can you have a love triangle without someone in that love triangle having a muddled sense of what's really going on? Strickland and Armstrong, according to the article, returned to Austin that evening, May 9th. 2 days later, Mo Wilson was shot dead in cold blood. So I don't know if I want to take it too much further than that. It's almost 2 hours. I feel like my voice is kind of going. So yeah, I'm not sure if I want to take it too much further than that. It is definitely quite a sad story. You do tend to feel like poor Mo, don't you? According to this, is kind of just a postscript. Again, it's going back to the article. Tolly last saw Strickland a few days after Wilson's death, when he dropped by Wheelhouse Mobiles a lot. Strickland was working on an old engine and looked despondent. According to the article, quote, it hadn't been easy to become famous through a niche sport that was new and unformed and perhaps not quite a real thing. Colin's been very calculated, Tolly said. He thinks a lot about strategy in a life that's very planned out. That really stood out to me. Those words. He thinks a lot about strategy. Hasn't he thought about strategy since this has happened? How must he approach this? How must he deal with this? Interestingly, at this time that Tolly visited Strickland, which was just a few days after her death, he doesn't say exactly when it was, but let's say it was 3 days later, 4 days later, but a couple of days later. At this point, the police account of Wilson's final hours was not yet public. And he didn't volunteer, he didn't tell Tolly that they went to the pool. He didn't tell that they had rum drinks after that. He just said that he dropped off a mountain bike at her apartment where Wilson was staying. Tolly described Strickland as detached and zombie-like. And then also said something about he's very good at reinventing himself. But what do you think about that? Did he drop off a mountain bike? The impression I get is that Strickland told Tolly that he saw Mo to drop off a mountain bike, but how do you drop off a mountain bike from a motorbike? Unless he went there more than once. Is that mentioned anywhere? Okay. I must say, when it feels like when you're chipping away, and it feels like you're kind of getting closer to the truth, that sense of disappointment becomes quite profound, where you realize, wow, this is what was going on. Your sense of sympathy for the victim only deepens. And if you've told a authentic story, if you've dived deep enough into the dynamics, then that disappointment really feels appropriate, and it resonates with the actual story, the real story. And I think that's kind of where we are, don't you guys? Don't you sort of feel like that sense of I don't know what the word is, just, you know what I mean? Just that sense of, oh, so that is what is going on. It's more than saddening. It's more than saddening. Thanks a lot, Zircon. Okay, so we are at about the 2-hour mark. I really need to end here. I did want to touch on this transcript, but I think we're going to have to leave it for another time. I'm feeling a little bit tired, and I'm supposed to do another live. I'm not really sure if I am going to do it. I'm feeling a bit drained just by going through that. But I hope you found it worthwhile. I think it has made the story a lot more personal, a lot more real, and the people in it also. I think you get a better sense of all three of them. And it was really important to get a better sense of Colin, and now we have, right? Thanks for that, Deborah. Thanks for that. Okay. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Yeah, it is kind of sickening. Thanks a lot, SM Kovalinsky. Thanks, Stephanie. I actually feel like I might have I don't know, I feel like might have a slight cold. Anyway, we'll see. I did swim earlier this evening, so maybe it's that. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. So going forward, I'm not sure what there is to talk about. I don't know whether we're going to hear too much from these other characters. Emily Rockwell, there are a couple of others. I don't know if they're going to talk to the media any more than they already have. Yeah, so we know that the court date is the 26th of June, 2023. I'll put that up again. And we'll see what happens between then and now. We'll see what happens between then and now. I will return at some point to deal with this transcript. Thanks a lot, Helena. Appreciate that. Thanks. A final thing I want to bring to your attention. Don't forget there is a launch attempt, another launch attempt of the Artemis 1 rocket. Third time lucky, let's hope. Launching for the moon. That's supposed to be today. It says here, NASA readies long delayed moon launch. So we'll see if that happens.
Florida, if the mission is successful, and this is why I'm so interested in it. NASA officials say that.
Let's hold tight. Okay. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, mods. Thanks, members. Actually, there's another new member or two that's joined us. Thanks a lot for signing up. And new subscribers as well. I see we're at 93.5. Thanks a lot. Growing gradually, but at least we're growing. Remember, if you get value out of these lives, if you feel like it's worthwhile, please make the effort to share amongst your networks or people who are talking about this case, perhaps on Facebook or Reddit or other forums. Please share this video there and maybe talk about some of the things that were talked about here, and just kind of spread the word kind of thing. I just want to kind of emphasize the sharing thing between here and 100,000. So that's really the point. Yeah, share, well, subscribe, share, and like. Yeah. But thanks a lot. Cynthia Nielsen, I think you're in South Africa. I think I can hear the birds singing here. I think maybe it's time for bed, right? Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, for joining me. Take care. Thanks a lot for the super chats. If you're watching on replay, remember you can hit the thanks button. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Good to hear, Deborah.